Hello there, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories today. Donald Trump has delivered a sustained attack on his critics in a news conference at the White House. He repeatedly assailed the media and claimed America and the world were in a mess when he took over. In an article for the French newspaper Le Figaro, the Prime Minister Theresa May has reiterated that Britain will not try to cherry-pick the best bits of EU membership. She'll meet with her French counterpart on Friday. In crisis talks have taken place between union company bosses and the government amid talk that a takeover deal could see thousands of Vauxhall workers lose their jobs. Hello there, you're watching the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with Dr. Eliza Philby and Christian May. So let's see what's on some of those front pages. The Guardian has gone with the story of the day. Donald Trump denying his presidency is in a state of chaos. The Times also has the US president on the front, but also looks at web giants profiting from an anti-vaccine frauds documentary. The NHS plans to reduce face-to-face care to deal with a £22 billion funding gap, according to an newspaper investigation. Train delays have soared to their highest level in a decade. That's on the front of the Metro. French bonds are trading at levels not seen since the Eurozone crisis amid a tumultuous presidential election. That's a splash on the Financial Times. A warning in the Telegraph of a revolt in the Tory heartland if Philip Hammond doesn't back down on higher business rates. The Express reports the odd bursts of exercise can significantly improve your heart health. In the Mail, 13 business groups claim rates rises are illegal. The social care crisis has been linked to an extra 30,000 deaths in a year. That's according to the Mirror. Forget the winter freeze. The Star says it's looking forward to a 17-degree heat wave. And the Sun claims EastEnders star Danny Dyer has quit the soap to sort his life out. Hello there again. I'm joined now by Dr. Eliza Philby and Christian May. Very good evening to you both. Good to see you. Let's talk about President Trump. The front page of the Times really captures that press conference. It was rather extraordinary, wasn't it?
Well, he's the gift that keeps on giving, Donald Trump. I mean, we're treated to a 75-minute press press report by Donald Trump, in which he did really use it as an opportunity to completely attack the media, it seemed. It was supposed to be a kind of press conference in which he addressed his achievements. Let's not forget that he's not yet been president for a month, and yet so much has seemed to have happened. I think it was an extraordinary performance. Some have said that he was erratic, out of control, seemingly unhinged, but actually it was Trump on the campaign trail, I thought. It was Trump doing what he did throughout the campaign.
Yeah, precisely, which is why quite a lot of American voters will have quite liked what they saw. Certainly elements of it. His attacks on establishment media, on the Washington consensus, will go down quite well in some parts of America, parts that voted for Donald Trump. But undoubtedly, it was an extraordinary performance, the likes of which we haven't seen from a White House podium before. And I'm sure its highlights reel will be streaming across YouTube as we speak. His attacks on the media were increasingly erratic. At one point, he was asked whether all of these stories which have emerged from leaks within the administration were real or not. And he said, well, the leaks are real, but the news is fake.
But he does have his supporters. I mean, not just in the United States. I've received a number of emails over the last couple of hours. People are saying, well, hang on a minute, he's talking for the American people. And there is a conspiracy against him. Just because the press doesn't like him, that doesn't make him a bad president. That doesn't make him a bad man.
And I think that's important to remember. You know, people may sneer and laugh and kind of think, you know, this guy is completely shambolic and chaotic. But actually, I mean, I have family in Nebraska who voted for Trump, see Trump as America's saviour, and actually would have watched those 75 minutes, and actually it would have actually completely validated and reaffirmed their belief in him. And you know, his not only attacks on media, but actually his successes. I mean, he's had tremendous success at basically publicly shaming companies to keep jobs in America, and it's worked. And also, you know, a number of things like the travel ban. Yes, huge amounts of people disagree with it, but also huge swathes of people agree with it.
So he says he's bringing that back in a form which will be compliant with federal law, which of course the first incarnation of that policy was not. I mean, here we are talking about how extraordinary his attacks on the media were, as if we haven't come to expect them. But the substance of this, he was also asked repeatedly about his associations with Russia, and in particular the circumstances surrounding the resignation of his National Security Advisor, General Flynn. And yet again, he seems to have got away without a huge amount of scrutiny on that particular point, most sensitive point, because in fact the way he treated the press, the way he conducted himself was more extraordinary and more fascinating for us to pick over. He said that no administration has ever achieved so much in such a short space of time. I'm not sure that's entirely true. And he also said that his administration was running like a fine-tuned machine, which is clearly not
and
the
that
case.
he'd inherited a disaster. I mean, a complete mess. And so
that's basically what the Guardian's saying, isn't it? The Trump denies presidency is in a state of chaos, but a lot has happened in the short time that he has been the president of the United States.
And also, meanwhile, you've got Rex Tillerson and also General Mattis doing the kind of real serious work, if you like, today, which, whether it was negotiating within NATO or addressing the G20. And, you are getting the picture that's emerging, which is how the White House is going to run, which is basically Donald Trump is going to be on constant campaign mode for the next, if he lasts 4 years. And, you're seeing the true power players within the White House emerge. I think, Tillerson and Mattis today making clear, pragmatic statements about engaging with Russia.
Sometimes at odds with Trump's stated
completely
positions.
Completely at odds with Trump's stated positions, which are often slightly vague and involve the word tremendous.
And also President Trump stepping away from the two-state solution. I mean, that's going to send ripples, not ripples, in fact, it's going to send shockwaves right across the Middle East.
And indeed it has. And the US ambassador at the UN has already had to clarify with remarkable speed with which the UN ambassador for the United States basically disassociates from the stated position, or the position at least flirted with by the president the previous day. He's going to make these kind of statements. And then, as Eliza says, it's up for the likes of his Secretary of State and his Defense Secretary to deal with other nations, to be the diplomatic face of the administration. And the front of that administration is going to be increasingly, one suspects, the kind of performance that the president put on today.
But also you are getting a sense that actually the Trump foreign policy is actually one that has one constant eye on the US domestic scene. I mean, when Mattis made a sort of statement to the NATO countries today saying, you guys have to start paying up properly because we're no longer going to foot the bill. That's a serious reflection of a foreign policy that is largely determined by US domestic policy and US domestic concerns.
OK, let's move over to domestic politics now. Tories facing revolt over nightmare rise in rates, according to the Daily Telegraph.
We've seen a drip of these kind of stories over the last few weeks. And we've published plenty at my own paper at City AM. The budget is coming up. What's happening is that there's a re-evaluation of commercial business rates on the cards. First time since 2008, and these rates, of course, as many viewers will know, are dependent on the rental value of your commercial property, which, of course, has increased enormously since 2008. And so a number of firms, small firms and firms with huge commercial property footprints, are facing millions of pounds worth of hikes in the rates. And as the budget is coming up, Philip Hammond's budget in March, you have more and more interest groups, and in this case Tory MPs, particularly in this case Tory MP who represents Westminster and the City of London, where there's a tremendous amount of commercial property, saying to the Chancellor, you have to take action to prevent this extraordinary rise in the bills, that particularly in the retail sector, which is facing extraordinary competition, pressure and rising costs in labour market costs in particular. So the last thing they need, like a hole in the head in fact, is a really steep rise in business rates.
There's two stories going on here. First, basically, they're bargaining for the budget. People are putting pressure on Philip Hammond on various issues, and business rates being one of them. But as Christian remarked, the kind of deeper story is actually this could, if they're not careful, end up being the government's poll tax, because they are sleepwalking into a dangerous scenario, re-evaluating retail sites, and for some small businesses, which are, at a time when the high street is in crisis and in decline because of the threat of online retail, some of their hikes are being increased by something like 25% and more. And that's, incredibly damaging, and, there's no it seems, no kind of transitory measures being put in place. This hike is going to come in, and it's going to come in fast.
Because fundamental to Tory policy, isn't it all about the individual, the entrepreneur?
And helping small businesses, absolutely.
Which they say they'll do. I mean, the government have pushed back on us time and time again to say you're scaremongering and this is outrageous. That is the government's position to everybody who's reporting these hikes. In fairness to them, that some of the raises are capped and there are exemptions for a large number of properties and businesses. But it's actually, think of places that you don't tend to think of. I mean, we did an investigation looking at the cost to London's theatres, for example. And some theatres and famous theatre institutions are going to see a 40% rise. And if you look at some of the properties which have enormous commercial footprints, like Amazon, and they're going to get, some are told, a sweetheart deal. So that then, of course, generates huge resentment among smaller industries. So it's a real balancing act that the Chancellor is going to have to walk. But he does have to take some effort to ensure that this does not become a burden that pushes a lot of retailers over the edge, because, as you said, Eliza, they're facing cost after cost after cost.
And also the knock-on effect for consumers, which will be inevitable.
Lots to get through. Just want to touch on this story from the Financial Times about French politics, the French presidential elections, and also the links with the French bond trade. What's that all about?
Well, I mean, I think the markets are they're sort of buzzing around trying to work out what's going to happen with the French election. And in many ways, the French election is fundamentally the most important election to happen this year, I think. Much more important, actually, than the American election last year in terms of what it means for the future of the euro and ultimately the EU. You know, if Le Pen wins, which at the moment there's sort of certainty that she'll win the first round, but unlikely that she'll win the second round. The French have a two-round system. If she does win, you know, there's all likelihood that she may pull France out of the euro. She's a very Eurosceptic
she
leader.
said it. She wants the return of the franc.
Well, so exactly. So if you pull the French out of the euro, there's no euro. If there's no euro, there's no EU. So we could be in a situation where we're trying to negotiate Brexit without actually an EU to negotiate with.
But as she said, she does need to win the second round, which is unlikely at the moment, but I guess anything can happen.
The system where basically in the first round you vote for someone you want, and in the second round you vote for someone you don't want. So that's essentially
there is this American academic who correctly predicted well ahead of time both the election of Donald Trump and the outcome of our Brexit referendum. And the reason people are spooked is because his third prediction is that Le Pen will win the French presidential election.
Well, and also she's been helped by the failure of Fillon, who's obviously been sort of dragged through this crisis involving his wife and the expenses scandal involving that. So his ratings and his kind of his likelihood of winning as the kind of conservative candidate, mainstream candidate, is
stranger things have happened. We must get to the break, guys. We've got lots more to come in a few moments' time. Stay with us on Sky News. Hello there, welcome back to the press preview. Eliza and Christian are still here with me. Christian, we're going to move to this story in tomorrow's Guardian about Tony Blair. He's piping up once again.
It's a front page story about a creature which has been long thought extinct, with conversations emerging now about bringing it back to life, beneath which is a story about Tony Blair intervening in the Brexit debate. The delusion of this man absolutely staggers me. He's going to give a speech tomorrow, as he's been threatening to do for a while, in which he'll say that he has a duty, and people who agree with him have a duty, to prevent the UK from leaving the European Union. And he's giving this speech at the headquarters of Open Britain, which is the rebadged Remain campaign organisation. And he's going to talk about how they have a duty to help Britain change its mind. This comes at a time when Theresa May is enjoying huge successes in the opinion polls, where polls show that if people were offered to vote again in the referendum, they would not change their mind. A little swing towards people say they vote leave. I mean, I gave a talk to a bunch of investment bankers in the city a couple of weeks ago, and 3 of them around the table said that if they were invited to vote again, having voted to remain, of course they all did, 3 of them said they would in fact vote to leave this time round because they've been encouraged by the way in which the conversation has gone. So I just think it's extraordinary, this intervention by this relic to sort of crop up again, having made a load of money, come back to British politics.
But do you think as a former Prime Minister it's his duty to stand up and say something?
No, not at all.
I think he probably gave up that duty when he disappeared, fell out with Britain for a good few years, disappeared advising despots on polishing their PR, and has now come back, decided that he's going to roll up his sleeves and tell everybody they were wrong.
He's sort of rejected his Davos lifestyle and has sort of renewed his mission, hasn't he? I wonder what the response within Europe to this would be, because 3 weeks ago apparently Blair was having a meeting with Juncker, and I wonder how realistic or even how viable Europeans actually think that this is likely to take place. And also, what's Blair's motive? I mean, I do think that he has this weird sense of sort of divine desperation, inspiration, I don't know, of kind of renewing his political purpose when, you know, he was Davos man for the last 7 or 8 years.
I suspect we'll go back to that before too long.
It's bemusing.
OK, let's move on to this story in the eye, story that a lot of people have been talking about over the last weeks, a crumbling NHS, and NHS that's under incredible amounts of pressure, and now there's a funding gap, £22 billion.
Well, the Eye have been running a whole series all week on the NHS and investigating the current state of it and what's the sort of pathway out of the crisis. And this report, this particular issue, is focusing on, firstly, how technology is hoping to sort of kind of plug some of that gap. So you'll not have real appointments with GPs, you may have virtual appointments with GPs. There's also a move towards more investment in preventative healthcare, so really teaching people how to avoid getting ill, as it were. But I think the NHS is something that we are going to have to, and we've been saying this for probably about 5 years now, we're going to have to take the politics out of the NHS, and we're going to have to come up with a serious solution that addresses the funding crisis within it. And I think that it needs to be, in many ways, it needs to be disassociated from social care, which you know is in its own crisis, as it were.
But are the two not interlinked?
Well, they are, of course, but because one puts pressure on the other. Yeah. And I think that the social care is something that, you know, citizens, particularly in the UK, need to realise that actually social care needs to be done by a large part within families rather than by the state.
Can I disagree with you on something you said, Eliza, which is that you need to take the politics out of the NHS debate? I disagree because I think what it needs is, it is a nationalised national healthcare system, so it's always going to be political. What it needs is for the political debate to be a rational one and a bold one. So you need politicians, I don't care which side of the divide they come from, but they need to recognise that they either say the health service is not going to be able to deliver all that you have come to expect it to deliver over the last 10, 20 years, or we're going to have to increase taxes, and that's a hugely politically unpopular thing to do.
Can they make those bold and brash?
We've got additional pressures here because we're going to have a decline, probably a decline of immigrant medical professionals, on which the NHS depends greatly. And secondly, we've got this kind of constant ageing crisis, which is probably going to last for another 10 years at least, possibly 15, because people are living longer, and we're reaching the point where the baby boomers are entering old age. And so this you know, there are big issues at stake here. It's not just a case of let's just put a penny on income tax.
No, that's right.
Whatever.
If the government says we're going to do this, we're going to fund the NHS to the way that people are demanding we do, we are not going to do this. And whatever that might be, give different government departments, different areas of government expenditure and investment, and say we simply can't do it all. But there may be some good news, because there's the Times report here. There are some
moving
pressures.
smoothly onto the Times. So just very quickly, spending on cigarettes and alcohol falls to 15-year low.
Yeah, people, it seems, are spending far less of their disposable income on cigarettes and alcohol. They're choosing instead to go out for experiences, dine out, go to the theatre, etc. And also, it's the younger generation are not sort of picking up the booze habit, and certainly not the smoking habit in anything like previous generations.
OK, Christian, Eliza, many thanks indeed. We'll be talking to you a little bit later on. Stay with us on Sky News. We're going to have a look at the weather now very quickly.